So now we get to talk about one of the many great and fantastic pieces of writing by Benjamin Franklin, who in many ways is sort of the gag man of the founding fathers. He was just a very great writer, very funny, like to tell jokes. And this piece, which at first glance might seem to be a serious piece of work, is yet another one of his jokes. Rules by which a great empire may be reduced to a small one. This is a piece of satire. The entirety of it is just basically a running joke told with a straight face. One thing that's particularly fascinating about it is that it was published very early. This predates the Declaration of Independence. It was originally published in London in September of 1773. So it's interesting that when you read this and you realize that the entire thing is just basically ripping on the British, that it was actually initially published in a British periodical. It was later in 1773 published in the United States in the Pennsylvania Gazette. This happened a lot of times. We would publish things both in England and in the United States, the pre-United States, so as to represent the colonists' point of view both here and abroad. So the earliness of the writing is pretty important, and it does definitely demonstrate how strong these sentiments of poor governance by the British were at this point in time. Its role as a satire gave him the opportunity to speak of things very directly and humorously, and maybe get away with saying things that he wouldn't have been able to get away with saying if he hadn't sounded as if he were kidding while doing it. Some of the best parts of this are, it's obviously in numbered sections, are part one, in which he comes up with the fantastic metaphor of describing an empire like a cake, and that the best way to eliminate that empire is to diminish it at the edges. Over the course of this document, he states many of the same complaints that were eventually discussed in great detail in the Declaration of Independence. But he did it as advice and quite a bit earlier. In Section 3, he discusses how the British should forget all the good done in the past and resent it now. And Section 4 talks about how you should send idiots to lead. The governors sent over the United States, the colonies, by the British tended to be corrupt types of people who weren't amenable to listening to the desires of the colonists. Section 8, he discusses directly a couple things that ended up being huge issues around the time of the Boston Tea Party, which were taxation without representation, and then also something that actually made it into our Bill of Rights, the Third Amendment to the Constitution, which regarded the quartering of soldiers. So in this satirical piece, he ends up successfully mentioning several different elements here. And he does it in a humble fashion, such as calling himself a modern simpleton, yet obviously he's not a simpleton. So there are some things to be able to consider a little bit more deeply, and something I think is important is not just to consider this as an entertaining reading, but to also consider it as sort of a prescription for how empires in today's world perhaps should view their own politics. So I would like you to consider specifically, how does this piece relate to current empires, including America? Is America, in its modern conception here in the 21st century, falling prone to some of the same sorts of problems that he proposes were the types of things we're going to end up sinking the British? That's a debatable thing, but it's something to consider, because one of the key goals of literature is not just to read it and enjoy it, or to read it and not enjoy it, or to study it, or to think about it, or anything, but to take what you read and then apply it to the world as it is before us today. So I would ask you to consider, what is America in regards to what Benjamin Franklin is saying here? Are we doing the same types of problems in our international dealings? Are we perhaps spreading ourselves out too thin in the same way that the British did? I'd hope that we're not. And you may come to the conclusion that we're not, but it is an element of debate. So, one big thing here is that satire does prove a great way to say what you think in a tongue-in-cheek fashion. And Franklin, through his own sort of wit, shows how deep-seated all of these sort of governmental and governance issues were in the years before the Revolution. And in many ways, the message that he puts forth here in this modest piece of satire serves not just as a piece of literature or something to read, but also serves as a little bit of prophecy for what was to come.